Consider a claim most of us make without a second thought. I am the exact same person who signed that contract 30 years ago. The word am in that sentence is pulling off a metaphysical trick. It asserts a strict, unbroken identity, one single entity existing at two entirely different points in time. But if you look closely at how society actually enforces that contract, the metaphysics are entirely decorative. All the actual work is being done by a physical body that can be located, a legal name, and a series of institutional databases. The paperwork is what bears the load. The diachronic self, the idea of a single self extending continuously through time, is an administrative achievement, not a metaphysical discovery. Institutions require a singular, countable noun. A bank cannot lend to a sprawling succession of psychological episodes, and a court cannot prosecute a fluid biological process. The system compresses reality into an enduring person to simplify billing and prosecution. Our understanding of who we are is a byproduct of these filing conventions. This analysis takes a strictly disintegrationist posture. The objective here is to take the grammar of identity apart to diagnose exactly what it has been doing. We are not building a blueprint for a utopian society. In modern administrative life, the metaphysical soul has departed. The database has quietly taken over its office. It is easy to see why institutions prefer the upgrade. A database never forgets, it never forgives, and it never suffers a crisis of identity. We do not necessarily have to abandon our everyday language to recognize this reality. After Copernicus proved the Earth revolves around the sun, people still said the sun rises at dawn. The vocabulary survived intact, but the underlying truth conditions of the words had to be updated. Because we live within an empty ontology that is sustained by institutional power, we cannot simply ignore it. We have to perform a forensic audit of how the concept of identity is deployed against us. The baseline reality of human existence is continuous and heterogeneous. At every fraction of a moment, your metabolic state shifts, your synaptic weightings adjust, and your relational position to the world changes. A legal or financial system cannot process a qualitative, continuously shifting flow. Administration requires discrete, homogeneous, countable units to function. Institutions rely on a cinematographic mechanism. They take snapshots of the human process, slicing the flow into segments treated as distinct entities. These episode boundaries are not physical facts, but editorial conventions, stamped by a records office to serve a specific purpose. This is why the segmentations vary so wildly. A financial protocol might segment a life coarsely, creating one legal person across a 30-year mortgage. Meanwhile, a therapeutic protocol might segment your identity month to month. The philosopher Henri Bergson established this distinction, the difference between lived duration, the continuous flow of reality, and the spatialized, segmented time required by bureaucracy. An episode, or a stage of life, is therefore a jurisdictional creation. It is an editorial boundary drawn over a continuous physical reality to make that reality administrable. This brings us to a severe problem for our justice systems: ultimate moral responsibility. To deserve true retribution, an action must issue from a persisting, responsible author. But tracing that authorship triggers an infinite regress. To be entirely responsible for an action, you must be responsible for the mental constitution that caused it. To be responsible for that mental constitution, you would have chosen it from a prior constitution, which you must have chosen, backward forever. The only way to terminate this regress is to invoke a causa sui, a self that somehow precedes itself to author its own creation. As Friedrich Nietzsche observed, the causa sui is the best self-contradiction yet conceived. It's a logical impossibility, maintained only to justify moral blame and punishment. No temporally and causally situated being is self-originating. Because that author cannot exist, ultimate responsibility of the kind required to justify retributive suffering is a logical fiction. Institutions are operating ledgers with no moral foundation. Since the enduring author doesn't exist, institutions manufacture one through authoring displacement. They compress a sprawling, gap-filled human reality into a single noun, and then treat that noun as the original source of the conduct. We have to split identity into two distinct categories: endogenous identity, which is your internal psychological feeling of connectedness, and exogenous identity, which is ascribed to you from the outside by administrative systems. Exogenous identities are plural and entirely uncoordinated. Credit bureaus, hospitals, and police keep separate ledgers. The singular person is a jurisdictional stitch, asserted entirely at the point of billing or punishment and abandoned everywhere else. The danger is how this colonizes the mind. Individuals internalize rigid external categories, narrating their inner lives using the architecture of their exogenous dossiers. When Descartes wrote, "I think, therefore I am," he assumed the I doing the thinking was a solid metaphysical fact. George Christoph Lichtenberg pointed out the error. The I is merely grammar's contribution. It's an indexical convention, not proof of a persisting metaphysical subject. The diachronic self is imposed upon us from the outside. The state and the market require continuous selves to function, and they turn that administrative convenience into a mandatory psychological identity, regardless of how we experience our lives. If the enduring self is a fiction, what mechanism connects a past episode to a present one? How do we account for contracts, long-term property agreements, and personal apologies? The answer is structured inheritance. It is a domain-specific, auditable alternative to strict identity. The present you does not equal the person who took out the loan 10 years ago. You inherit from them through a persisting legal index. Because it is an inheritance, it can be subjected to constraints. Constraint 1 is domain specificity. Continuity is established for the specific nexus. A financial protocol transmits assets. It doesn't grant the bank a global metaphysical claim over your personhood. Constraint 2 is anti-arbitrage symmetry. You cannot selectively invoke continuity to keep the crits, like a house, while claiming discontinuity to dodge the debits, like the mortgage. Constraint 3 denies inferences drawn from unavoidable benefits. An institution cannot enforce obligations by retroactively invoicing subjects for non-returnable benefits, like childhood education or state infrastructure. Finally, institutional countersymmetry. If an institution invokes diachronic continuity to collect a debt or enforce a penalty, it must accept that exact same continuous liability when it owes compensation. Currently, humans are told they can never escape their past, while corporations treat bankruptcy and restructuring as a rebirth, completely dodging previous liabilities. Replacing strict identity with structured inheritance shifts the balance of power. It removes the metaphysical life sentence and replaces it with plural, defeasible tethers that demand constant justification from the institutions enforcing them. When we apply this model to the criminal justice system, the implications are severe. Because there is no self-originating author and no enduring diachronic self, basic moral desert is completely unpurchasable. Retribution relies on a structural fiction. It requires a metaphysical stain to be stored inside an enduring subject for later collection. Without that enduring subject, the architecture of retribution collapses. Punishment, defined as the imposition of suffering to balance a cosmic ledger, must be abandoned. What survives is remedial transmission, restraint for danger, restitution for harm, and treatment where possible. This bypasses the tainted soul and targets the material reality of the action. But the test is strictly functional. The moment a judicial institution begins cultivating suffering and labeling it consequences, punishment has smuggled itself back through the rear door. A massive portion of civilization's judicial architecture has been built on a double fiction, an impossible author persisting through time. Recognizing the administrative reality requires dismantling systems built purely for retribution. The pragmatist will object to all of this. They will point out that the state absolutely requires continuous persons to function, to collect taxes, to enforce laws, and to govern. They are right about the operational requirement, but functional necessity is not metaphysical entitlement. Needing a fiction to operate a bureaucracy does not transform that fiction into a moral truth. Voltaire famously wrote, "If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him." Institutions use that exact logic on the human soul. Because they need an enduring target for their invoices, they insist one exists. Michel Foucault demonstrated the modern disciplinary individual is a product of the dossier, fabricated by the very documentary machinery that claims merely to describe him. This is why appealing to your deep self or your true soul to fight an institution always fails. The claim that the record isn't the real me is unprovable, so it is adjudicated by the very institutions holding the file. They control the definition of the soul. The battleground is no longer ontological. Resistance doesn't come from arguing about who you truly are inside. Resistance is an audit of the administrative currency itself. The soul will not save you from the file. By understanding structured inheritance, we strip the state and the market of their false moral authority. We force institutions to abandon the language of cosmic debt and fight their ledgers strictly on the grounds of proportion, expiry, and symmetry.